Welcome to AIGA Design for Good webcast series, a series supported by an award from the NEA with additional funding from IBM. Today, May 26th, is our sixth webcast in the series, and we will address the role designers can play in engaging with veterans, helping them heal, be understood, and sharing their stories, as well as navigate the system that is supposed to support them, the VA. We had a number of occasions over the past 6 months to discuss what design can do for social impact. How does that work? And I wanted to provide you with a little bit of a reminder of our mission at AIGA, which is to really look at how this ethos pervades through all our strategic initiatives. And now we could use different projects and examples and tactics and strategies to illustrate how design can ignite, accelerate, and amplify this design-driven social change. We believe that it's our business to demonstrate design as a problem-solving value and also activate designers in their communities, create collective impact. What's interesting over the past 6 months is that in touching on social impact basics with Mark Rendell, we already had hinted at the fact that governments and government systems perhaps are the sort of next destination for design thinking, human-centered design. And we had a chance to discuss this through a webcast a couple months ago that looked at Chile's constitution. And it's interesting to how the sort of loop gets looped again today. Today we'll have a chance to address two major ideas that complement each other. One is really looking at how art and design can serve inclusion for veterans, a population that is often marginalized and forgotten, a population that may not value, in fact, creativity as a mode of expression, as a tool for integration and re-entering civil society. But we also look at how design can help bring back humanity into systems, into very complex and seemingly not exactly human systems such as the VA, and really help transform entire processes. With me today, we'll have Tyler Way, who is the co-founder of a grassroots organization based in West Michigan called Has Heart, and who will also present with us in a week at our Dallas Leadership Retreat. So really someone who's been working very closely with the West Michigan AIGA chapter as well as the Detroit chapter. Tyler comes from design and has started this enterprise about 7 years ago now with his colleague, a former vet, with the intent of really leveraging art as a healing process and a way to engage with veterans. When he's not at the helm of this enterprise that is becoming quite big, and you'll hear about it, he designs for a shoe company. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Tyler Way, and then we'll get to Amber Schlunning afterwards.
Yeah, well, I'll just jump into a little bit of a slide presentation to kind of help everyone understand a little bit more about what Has Heart is and what it is that we do. So as mentioned, I started Has Heart with a U.S. Navy veteran, Michael Hyacinth, about 7 years ago. And it all started when we met for coffee. We got introduced through a mutual college professor that I had, said we should meet. And so, as I was saying, we kind of realized over our discussion over coffee that there was a significant gap between his world as a veteran and my world as a creative. At the time, I was a freelance artist and designer, being able to create artworks for some NBA clients as well as working as a footwear designer for Sebago. And so we realized there's this pretty big divide, and at the same time, Art Prize was happening in the Grand Rapids, and that's a big international art competition. And so we saw that brought about 400,000 people together around art. And so we figured, there's got to be some power that we can connect our two worlds. And so that's when we created Has Heart and really built that bridge between the military world and the civilian world, and done so by creativity. and utilizing creatives and the mediums of art, design, and fashion to benefit veterans in different ways. And that led us to creating the Hero Series, where we partner one veteran with one artist, and we give them the mission to get together and tell their story. And obviously, these are two strangers just starting to get to know each other, and so it's kind of this intimate 2-day process in which the veteran will kind of share some basics about them, and then the artist kind of shares a little bit about themselves, and then they start to build a little bit of a dialogue and also a conversation and relationship. And so as they go through those 2 days, the artist is kind of pulling information from their story and taking those keywords and writing them down and whiteboarding and kind of brainstorming some key concepts that they kind of see the veteran through their story as they tell it. And so as they kind of start to hone in on what their design could be, and based on what they brainstormed, they start sketching concepts and really putting pen to paper a little bit and fleshing out some of those ideas. And then at the same time as the artist is kind of working on that, and then we also enable the veteran to tell their story directly. And so that's where the video comes into play during the process, and really kind of giving them a platform to share their story and experiences in a new, different way. And then the artist will take about 2 weeks to finalize their design, and so they kind of walk away after those 2 days with the concept nailed down, and then the artist will go back on their own time, finalize that design, and get that ready for print, because we found that T-shirts are this great medium where we're able to share their story in a unique way, in an engaging way that can be exhibited and shared as a work of art, and really tell the story from a product design perspective and also on a retail and experience perspective. And so every year at Art Prize, we unveil our new annual Hero Series designs. And we also include a pop-up shop where people can purchase that T-shirt or that decal or embroidered patch that veteran co-designed and take that with them, or give it to a loved one or a friend as a gift, and at the same time have the story attached to it. So it's really getting that veteran story out into the world. And we've been able also to expand on items other than T-shirts. As a footwear designer, we're able to work with Bates Footwear and work with some of our wounded veterans and actually design a boot that was produced and made in the USA, and really kind of made people appreciate a little bit of what goes into all these products and all the different hands that touch them along the way. And so really telling stories with the design details, but also the manufacturing aspect and how many American jobs went into making this boot and where all the components came from. So it's really kind of telling a multifaceted story through all of this. So we've been doing Hero Series projects for the past 5 years and have partnered 5 veterans and 5 artists each year. Obviously, we've had a very diverse group of veterans and artists, which has been awesome. Sometimes we've flown them from across the country into Grand Rapids to do the project, and then we also worked with the West Michigan chapter to the project, which is my home chapter. And then last year we took it to Detroit to kind of take our first step into a different city. And that was very successful, and the response to the project in a new city to people who haven't seen it before was very positive. So that was kind of our first step out, which is, you know, kind of a powerful way to share these designs in a new perspective, in a new way. So that kind of got us asking, how do we impact more veterans, more artists, and more civilians through this? We're an extremely small grassroots nonprofit organization, basically funded by Michael and myself for these past number of years. We have a small core volunteer group that does all that. So how do we scale our impact? And that kind of got us thinking, let's take it across the country ourselves. And so we're about to embark on a 50-state Veterans and Artists United tour, in which my soon-to-be wife, who I'll be marrying this weekend, will live and work out of an Airstream trailer with our cat, and traveling to every state and partnering one veteran with one artist in each state, and documenting and compiling all of the design process, their final design, and everything else included in the journey, into a coffee table book and an updated blog and social media updates and media coverage kind of along the way as a way to get this process and meaningful journey out into the public to help build awareness of veterans. But we know we can't do it on our own, and so that's where AIGA has become such a key partner of ours, starting with the local chapters and now looking to expand that partnership on a national level as we go to each state. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of those details next week at the leadership retreat. But we definitely have designed this project with AIGA and 70 plus chapters in mind. So we definitely want to continue this conversation and utilize the talent that we as designers and artists have to not only create but also tell stories through our creations. And so that's kind of a responsibility that we don't take lightly, and especially with this being Memorial Day weekend, I think this is a great time to kind of share the project and the meaning behind it, and also kind of appreciate a little bit more of what these other men and women have been able to do, so that we can create and we can enjoy our freedom to create. And so kind of on that note, that's kind of where HasArt has been and kind of where we're going and where we see things going. And it's really just been a passion project that has led to more and more, and we want to share that with more people across the country.
The VA Center for Innovation is really looking at processes and challenges around how to bring human collaborations together and human-centered design methodologies to really address how to how to address the welcoming, the re-entering of these military men and women that have given their life for America. And Amber has been heading this studio, in-house studio really, at the VA to really look at how these methodologies can try to connect on a human level with these veterans that are often looked at as a group of, an discrete group of people without much consideration for their experience. One of the things that they face mainly is the mental health issues when they come back, and a lot of the barriers that they face when they use the service of the VA is about like, how do we even get to it? How do we access the service? So Amber will talk about what her team has been up to and how to create system change through human-centered design. So I'll leave it up to you, Amber. Thank you for being with us today.
Awesome. Well, I'm super pumped to be here. I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to speak to you guys. So I'm calling in from Washington, D.C. today from the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Center for Innovation, as Leticia mentioned. And here at the Center for Innovation, we work on all kinds of gnarly challenges. VA is dedicated to providing a seamless and unified veteran experience across the entire country. And so what does that mean? So that means that a veteran walking into a medical facility in Los Angeles has the same experience as if they were to walk into a medical center in Detroit, Michigan. And more importantly, they should be able to get to the thing that they are seeking the very first time they try. So today I'm going to talk to you about some of our projects aimed at improving access to mental health care through the application of human-centered design. So back in 2014, we spent a lot of time talking to veterans across the country to learn more about their lives and some of the challenges and barriers that they were facing interacting with the VA system. And we learned a lot about their struggles with interacting with the mental health care system specifically. And so we decided to dig in and to learn more and try to fix some of this. So to get started, we forced ourselves to get pretty specific about who exactly we were going to focus on along this journey to and through care. And we came up with this guiding map that you see on your screen here. We recognize that it can take years for someone to get to the turning point, that moment in time when they have courage to reach out for help. And literally it can take a single moment, just even one reason for an individual to not see it through. Whether that be an unanswered phone call, a curt receptionist, or a confusing form, these things can make someone in need give up very quickly. So we decided to focus on this very delicate moment of courage. We decided to focus on those who have reached this turning point. Just to reiterate a little bit, we are focused on, for this particular project, we're focused on those who have seized that moment of courage and are at a turning point to seek care. And they're taking some actions, however small, to get that help. One of the things that I was beginning to talk about was that we all know, though, once you make that decision to get care, you then have to find it. You have to figure out who to ask for help and how to ask for help. Physical health care in both the private sector and the VA require very little of a would-be patient on the front end. You have to know perhaps just that your arm feels funny in order to find the thing that you're seeking. Conversely, someone seeking mental health care in both the private sector and the VA have a pretty heavy burden placed upon them. They need to know what type of provider they are going to seek. A licensed clinical social worker versus a PhD psychologist. Well, what the heck's the difference? And also something about the treatment that they're going to request. So there has to be some level of self-diagnosis that takes place in order to navigate a lot of these systems. And so once someone extends that hand for help, there are many hurdles and paperwork and loud waiting rooms and phone calls to get over in order to get care. And so we wanted to dig into how all of this impacts someone's ability to actually get the care. How many are leaving as soon as they take that first step, and how many are we never seeing again because the processes are too hard? So in addition to focusing on those who have reached the turning point and are taking action, we also decided to focus on veterans who are coming to VA for the very first time. Because we felt that for first-timers, these hurdles feel the most monumental. And so that felt like a good starting point to us. And so, slides. And so with the help of our friends at the Public Policy Lab, we launched into a discovery and spoke with veterans and their family and healthcare providers and community supporters across the country. And we conducted over 6 interviews and heard very frustrating stories and heartening stories from veterans from all military service eras, well, from Vietnam to present day. An array of military specialties we heard from and backgrounds, diverse ethnicities and races and genders. We traveled to rural and urban communities, spending times in coffee shops and homes. And a lot of these conversations led to moments of some laughter and also a lot of tears. So we brought this data back, sorted through it, and the analysis of the data led to us illuminating some key needs for all of the people involved along this mental health journey for support. And these served as our guiding principles as we sought to squash the barriers. So just to kind of quickly go through them, those seeking mental health care need clarity. They need to understand the pathways communicated in plain language and non-clinical terms. They also need to navigate as few touch points as possible. Ideally, they're taking no more than 2 steps before they get what they need. peer support, this community piece, is very important for those seeking mental health care, as peers are the ones who are listened to, and they are often the ones who finally convince someone to take that step and reach out for help. And confidentiality. Veterans need to be able to trust this system. Not only the system, but the people and all of the pathways. It's not going to lead to dead ends, and their energies are worthwhile. They must believe that their privacy is wholly protected. We also learned some things about the artifacts. So we learned that VA forms, these very stiff government forms, aren't just stiff, but they can also feel very disrespectful and re-trigger trauma symptoms in brain-injured veterans. And this is just another opportunity for veterans to fall out of the care pathway. The other is that opaque and multi-step duplicative processes make veterans very uncertain and discouraged. Furthermore, we found that despite all of the information out there, that veterans are lacking reliable tools to sort through, make sense of, and act on the information available. And much of this is not unique to the VA, but exists throughout the private sector as well. So first-timers, that population we're focused on, the first-timers seeking mental health care feel pretty frustrated about the burden of knowledge required to navigate the system. The process is laden with clinical terminology and very, very complex steps, even for someone who does not have a challenge of mental illness. Again, not unique to the VA. And so with this overwhelming amount of choices and no clear path to success, veterans often take this opportunity to turn away from VA. Many never return. Some only reach out when they reach a crisis point, and sometimes that's too late. Others find their way into the ER because they know someone there will have to help them. The result is an added burden on an already overloaded ER staff and a delay for veterans connecting with the right kind of care. So, in response to this hurdle, a crackerjack team of VA employees down in Jackson, Mississippi, and our team at the VA Center for Innovation, this project specifically led by our designer, Melissa Chapman, partnered to develop this concept, the universal symbol. The aim is to help both staff and veterans navigate towards appropriate and timely care. The ultimate goal is so that they are not falling out of the system. The design was co-developed after gathering additional interviews and shadowing staff and veterans at the Jackson VA Medical Center, all the while keeping central the core needs I mentioned earlier: clarity and confidentiality. The team shadowed veterans and found that depending on who veterans ask for help, they get a different answer, and they're led down a different hallway, find a different door, a different dead end. By shadowing staff, they quickly realized that each staff member had a completely different concept of how to get to mental health care support. Different phone lists, different understandings of the offices, the access points that are available to veterans. So the team developed this cohesive branding campaign. One single logo meant to be associated with a range of services and products and locations. And the concept was built to be responsive to an ever-changing and ever-shifting system, changing operating procedures, and shifting office space. So the concept doesn't just take into account this symbol that you see here, but also a back-end piece, like a universal mental health telephone extension that the team spent a ton of time mapping and designing. And so this project is very much still a work in progress, and it's currently being tested at a few VA medical centers across the country. So stay tuned for that one. Another confusing entry point for first-timers into VA mental health care is via online and phone. There are no easy ways to get in via these touch points. There are many, many websites with way too much information, broken links, a mess of phone numbers, which sometimes people answer. And all of this confusion allows only the most persistent to break through to the other side to get care. And so we built a coalition of VA employees and partners and advisors and designers to develop some concepts to test. The goal with this concept, this particular concept that I'm about to run you through, the Mental Health Concierge, which is a working title, is to reach veterans who are standing for the first time outside of VA's door and wondering whether or not and how to come in. So this is one of the prototypes the team developed. So imagine yourself or a veteran you may know in a moment of great need and struggle and bravery, Googling veteran mental health care or something like this, and finding their way to this vets.gov splash page here. This particular prototype, the inspiration from this came from our friends at the NYC Well Initiative out of New York City's governor's office, which seeks to provide an easy and safe pathway into mental health support. This prototype uses plain language, minimal language, gives options for communicating via call and chat and text, and it transparently sets expectations. But building this veteran-facing website or the design of this particular page is just one small part in the overall service design effort. The team also spent an incredible amount of time mapping what happens on the backstage, the things that veterans don't see. And they mapped what currently exists, and it is gnarly. And they also mapped what ideal could and should look like. And in doing so, we bounced up against policy and regulation hurdles, cultural barriers, and so what you see here on the screen is a hybrid of the current state, that gnarly state, and the ideal, where we want to go. And so while this is not perfect, our aim is that this system is significantly improved or enough that it's worthy of going to test. And also improved such that key needs that we discussed a little bit earlier in the presentation are preserved, like clarity, confidentiality, community, and continuity. So to run you through this really quickly, you'll notice on the top of the slide 4 major elements of the design. So the first is that web interface, that prototype I just showed you. The second is the connection to a national call center representative that should begin to shoulder the navigational burden for a veteran, and also it shoulders the burden for an already overloaded VA frontline local staff. The third element across the top here is initiates the process to integrate a veteran into local care in his or her community. And finally, the fourth element provides a warm acknowledgement of the interaction with follow-on contact information. So this is a massive undertaking for the VA, from engaging senior leaders in Washington, D.C., developing buy-in from clinicians in the field across VA, forming new partnerships. This is no small feat. But we like a good challenge, and the team and VA is committed to improving this system so that veterans get what they need when they need it. And while it's still very much ongoing, we hope to pilot it soon, and we are most definitely gaining. So thanks for listening to me chat today about some really exciting work. I am just one representative of so many people who are working on this stuff. And if you have questions after this event, please feel free to reach out to either me or Melissa. Thanks.
So it's interesting because you two have so different approaches and ways of looking at this problem. How do we connect with veterans? How do we serve them better? And you bring art and design in both cases bring people together, right? You connect to them. So the question for you is how did you find those vets? And this sort of applies to both of you in a way. Like, how do you identify the people that are willing to sort of play with you? Ember starts, and then Tyler can follow.
Yeah, so this is actually a common question even within the VA, and it's one of my favorite questions because my answer is often that veterans are all over the place. They are in all communities. You can walk into a grocery store and raise up your hand and ask someone if they're a veteran, and the answer is likely, no, but that guy is, or no, but my grandfather is. And so veterans are everywhere. And how we found them for these particular projects is starting with some personal networks, so my network and a handful of others, and then kind of building from there. We have since moved off of that a little bit, and we are doing a lot of cold calling. So we will pick up the phone and call employers in Salt Lake City or go to gyms in Los Angeles and just start asking around, and before you know it, your docket is full of people to talk to.
And Tyler, what about you? Like, how was the reaction of those vets when you find them?
Yeah, well, our end is a little bit different because we don't need nearly as many. And that's also where my partner Michael comes into play because he's an 8-year U.S. Navy veteran. And so he has local connections and also connections nationwide with different veterans organizations. And so typically as we begin or start a new project, Michael will kind of handle and work with his connections and personal relationships to see what veterans would be interested, whereas I will focus on providing the designer partner. But now that we've done a few years worth of projects, a lot of it has come down to past veterans that we've had involved, recommending it to some of their friends. And so it's been a little bit more of a word of mouth now that we've gotten a few more veterans and a few years under our belt. And now our big challenge would be, okay, how do we find, literally a veteran in every state across the country, and not only find them, but also one that is at a place in their journey to share their story, because it is a very intimate and challenging and intimidating process for a veteran to do. Typically, a lot of the veterans we've worked with don't really like the limelight or being the center of attention, and so that's kind of been instilled in them that they are, one of many and serve for a greater cause. And so when that spotlight is a little bit focused on them, it can be a little bit more challenging. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to open it up to veterans, because then that pool shrinks a little bit, because it does take a person in a certain state in their journey to participate. But we've also found that even those that didn't think they were ready to open up really have opened up. In 2015, for our West Michigan chapter design, we actually worked with 3 Vietnam-era veterans from the Grand Rapids VA. And so it was the first time we've worked with older veterans, because a lot of them previously have been Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. But this time we worked with Vietnam-era veterans who have been holding on to these stories for 30, 40, 50 years, oftentimes not even telling their spouses or kids. And so for some of them, it was very hard to open up. But for others, once you kind of break through and get to know them on a personal level and just kind of eliminate those barriers, and then they talk a little bit more freely. And then when they see the other veterans around them also sharing their story, and then they feel much more open. So, there's been different challenges in finding the right veterans, but ultimately, any veteran that has a story to tell. And so as a designer, that's kind of our mission and purpose, is to help them tell that.
Yeah, and it's interesting how, in a way, you both are validating the vets, right? You're sort of giving them a voice, and you giving them an outlet to express themselves. And the difference, I guess, between the two of you is that, Tyler, you are all about making that story public, whereas Amber, you sort of capture the ethnographic research to then embed it in actual service design provision. So, but in the end, the storytelling aspect is both critical in both places, right? But it's sort of very different in terms of how it's being used eventually. Speaking of that storytelling aspect, I mean, I know, Tyler, that you spent a lot of time, sort of putting everything on social media, having cameramen, filmmaker, documentarists, writers sort of being part of the project. So to really work around as much of the engagement on the human level than on the sharing of the story with the public. But what about you, Amber? Like, are you able to share some of this information in a more public way? Because I feel like what you're doing is also about informing the general public about the role of the VA, which is obviously changing according to what war the America is embarked on.
Yeah, it's been a balance for us. So it's something that we've struggled with quite a bit, is using this information and telling stories in meaningful ways, and some of that is due to staffing restrictions and just not enough hours in the day. And some of it is due to timing, wanting to be able to build a very powerful coalition inside of VA and with partners, and making sure that information is kind of shared when it needs to be and when it should be shared. So we have been talking about it a little bit. We run a Medium blog and have some other ways of telling stories and sharing these stories. But it's definitely an area where we need to get a lot better at, for sure.
And so, for instance, in one of your slides, you present a sort of journey in 4 phases, right, that you sort of walked us through. This is obviously a typical service design breakdown of the different pain points and interactions with the user. Have you shared this image with the veterans themselves to help them navigate yet? Somebody's asking this on the webcast.
That's a great question. So pieces and parts of it have been shared and beginning to test with veterans, but largely the entire concept has not yet, because we are not at a point of fully piloting it yet right now. So we are still working through, the political conversations and coalition building and the rest. So it hasn't been shared. This specific map has not been shared yet. No. But we have every intention of doing that, most definitely, yeah.
Right. Tyler, you are in many businesses in a way, right? I mean, it's a grassroots organization that you built, but there's a social enterprise aspect to it, and that's sort of what makes it very special, and really looking at the economic integration of the vets as well. Can you speak to the challenges of setting up such a social enterprise, and how exactly the benefits can go back to the vets?
Well, with any young startup, nonprofit, or even for-profit business, a lot of the challenges come from funding, or lack thereof. As I mentioned, it's been something Michael and I have kind of have funded ourselves over these last 5 or 6 years, and now we're getting to a point where we can't do that anymore and have bigger ambitions that will require more corporate level partners, but also kind of an army of support across the country. But one way we're able to kind of eliminate some of the fundraising that's required for a lot of nonprofit organizations is to utilize these designs to create products that then sustain the organization. So the goal is to make a sustainable nonprofit organization that doesn't rely on donations all the And so that's where partnering with the right manufacturers and kind of telling a made in USA story at the same time has become an important component for the organization, because we're not only telling these stories and documenting them and sharing them online and exhibits, but we're also enabling people to purchase products that are designed and take that home with them. So that creates an opportunity for support on a different level. Oftentimes people don't know how to support veterans other than just saying thank you to them. So this is another way for people to financially give their support, but also wear that support on their shirts, on their boots, on their pins. And so it enables people to get engaged with veterans in a different way and learn their stories and help them tell their stories. Because ultimately, we're just trying to connect people, and in order to connect people, you have to understand the person across from you. And so this is kind of that bridge that connects some of that. And some ways of benefiting the veterans themselves is they get a portion of proceeds from their design that's sold. And so we'll partner with these manufacturers, and then depending on how many are sold, that veteran and their family will get a portion of that every year. So in addition to sustain the organization, we're also hoping to benefit the veteran financially and their families as well. And as we grow and get larger, then we'll be able to do that on a larger scale. Even though these last few years it's been a little bit of pennies here and there, but we hope that will change in the years to come.
Yeah, you have hope. When you think about the T-shirt in America, it is a big business. I was looking at this guy on the street the other day that has a U.S. Army T-shirt, and it's so interesting to me how people wear a badge of some honor that they don't necessarily belong to. There's a sort of attraction to this idea of belonging to something powerful, the same way that Americans wear their flags on their T-shirts, which is like totally funny for me. But it's interesting how there's a power to these, also these sort of names of, the U.S. Army. We had the visit the other day here of one of our medalists who happens to be the designer of the NASA logo, that probably very well. And he was telling us how many people call him to this day, after the logo's been retired since 1992, to put the logo on T-shirts. So it's going to work. So I have one more question for you guys to wrap up this conversation, and I'm sorry it was a little shortened, but we can continue beyond this webcast, obviously, which is about the measurement of your impact. One of my favorite activities here at AIGA is to look at how Design for Good can be not only an inspiring way to amplify and tell stories about social impact design, but also trying to really embed ways in which you can start measuring your impact. What kind of indicators and metrics are you using along the way to see your progress? So I'm sure you have both very different ways of doing this, but if you can speak to this, that'd be great.
Ember.
Yeah, sure. So we're developing it. We're trying to take pieces and parts from partners like NYC Well and the call centers that they're running. But a lot of them, it feels to us, are kind of brand new and don't actually exist. And so we are in the early stages of figuring out what is the meaningful measurement here. What are we trying to see? And then build off of that. So it's still very, very, very brand new.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about you, Tyler?
We have some ways where we're able to, use Google Analytics, social media engagements, kind of all the standard measurements, which, is one good way of doing it. Then you also can tie in product sales to see how much is getting out there. And then also when we do events, tracking how many people come through the door. There's a lot of numbers and information that we can't gather because it is pretty qualitative. You can't measure the impact that someone exhibiting or viewing the exhibit has on that. And so that's where, we just have to kind of trust that if people are willing to take the time to read these stories and look at these designs, and they're walking away impacted. So it gets a little bit difficult and kind of muddy to try and measure that. But we're still kind of learning, okay, how do we measure impact? Because as a growing nonprofit, that's how you get grants, is measuring impact. And so because we don't work with hundreds or thousands or millions of veterans, people kind of ask, well, what impact are you really making? And so that's where we're trying to figure out, how do we do it on a number-based opportunity, because that's how businesses measure success, especially when you're looking at sponsorships and partnerships.
Yeah.
They want to know basically what that return on their investment is as a donation. So that's something we're still working through as well, and probably always will be.
Well, qualitative impact is good impact too. It doesn't have to all be quantitative. But we'll be revealing next week during the retreat and beyond a new tool that we're building here. We're testing it, called the Path to Impact. I would love to share with both of you. It's sort of a 4-step workbook that walks the designer through different ways of looking at envisioning a project from the beginning, like really thinking about it. What are you trying to change, and how do you set goals for yourself? And then collect data, learn how to analyze that data, and sort of embed it within your case study story, so that the storytelling at the end is not just like an afterthought. It's like, oops, what was it that we were trying to measure? Which is, often happening in social impact work. So I'm happy to share that with you. And I have somebody on the line who's asking whether we could share your contact, both of you. Would you be open to this? Yes, great. Thank you. Okay, one last question to close. On a personal note, you both put your hearts in this work, and one of them bears the word heart. Can you just provide a last word on your personal journey, that how your personal journey basically informed this work? I mean, especially you, Amber, as a veteran.
Yeah, it is most definitely a professional journey and a deeply, deeply personal journey. Yeah, I'm a combat veteran myself, and have served with many like me and unlike me. And the reason I came to VA in the first place is because of the gnarly challenges and the massive opportunity area, and hearing from my peers and my father, who is an Army veteran, and his peers about the frustrations that they were having getting some kind of help. And it just felt like there were ways to solve this. We're not sending someone to the moon here. We should be able to do this if we all come together. And so, yeah, I mean, the reason I'm here is definitely rooted in my own personal experience, for sure.
Yeah, mine also is very deep on a professional level and also a personal level. But I would say it kind of goes back to kind of my personal faith and helping and loving those around me, and utilizing my talents and resources to do so. And so I think I had a couple friends who were in the middle of Iraq and Afghanistan when we first started this organization. And so that was my personal motivation to co-found Has Heart with Michael, because if anything had happened to my friends, I wanted to be in a position where I could help them somehow. And the only way I knew how to is through kind of my professional talents and skills and network. And so that was really kind of my driving force, was my personal connection to some friends who were veterans. And then once you got started and worked with veterans and saw the impact and felt the impact, and then that just kind of hooks you and keeps you going and is kind of the fuel to the fire.
Great, thank you. You both bring a very beautiful human touch to all of this. So thank you for being so candid and open about your process and your personal commitment. We're gathering a lot of questions about how the chapters of AIGA can get involved in this project. And as I said in the introduction, we will present this project next week, and Tyler is actually flying just before getting married to present this project to us. So we will have a chance to also gather for you more information about how to connect with you, and as you're developing your itinerary of your travel, we'll make sure that we connect you with the people that are already expressing interest in this project. Thank you again to both of you, Amber Schlening at the VA and Tyler Way in West Michigan with Has Heart. This is our 6th webcast funded by NEA and IBM. We'll do more, I'm sure, and this summer we're launching a new series of webcasts around diversity and inclusion, which is another initiative of AIGA. Thank you and happy Memorial Day, everyone.